For me, writing Imagine Heaven was actually a lifelong journey, because I came at this topic of near-death experiences and the Bible and God and all that from an agnostic, skeptical, engineer perspective. I was an engineer before I ever became a pastor or an author, and I didn't believe. I thought Jesus was a legend. I thought God, who knows? You can't know. And my dad was dying of cancer, and someone gave him the very first research on that coined the term near-death experience. It's when people clinically die, or that's been my focus of research, when people clinically die, so that no heartbeat, no brain waves, and yet modern medicine brings them back. And they come back consistently talking about being more alive than they've ever been before, in a place more real than this, more beautiful than we can imagine, a great reunion with loved ones, and then the presence of this God of light and love who they never wanted to leave. And so I picked this up on his bedside table, and I just start reading it, and I couldn't stop. I read it in one night, and I said, wow, okay, here they chronicled about 60 or 80 people who had these experiences. And, this is like over 35 years ago. And I was like, wow, maybe there's something maybe this stuff is real. And so it got me just more open-minded, and I started researching. And because so many of them saw this God of light and love, and even Jesus, I started reading the Bible. And so I came to faith, and over the last, but I also had an insatiable curiosity.
Mhm.
What are these near-death experiences? And then how do they correlate with the Bible as I started to understand why to trust it? And so that's what I've done for 35 years. I've studied well over 1,000 cases of near-death experience all over the world. And I wrote Imagine Heaven in 2015, really showing that the commonalities of what people say, and there are consistent commonalities of what they experience. And again, every culture on earth, every continent on earth, and how those align with what God's told us about what we should expect and what it's going to be like. And then I wrote a new book just last year, Imagine the God of Heaven, which is really the same thing. It's looking through the eyes of 70 people that I interviewed all over the globe who talk about the experience of this God of light and love and who he is and what he's like.
Wow. And John, what are a couple of the commonalities, as you say? What resonates through these stories?
Yeah. Well, actually, let me tell you the commonality through a couple of stories, because I think that helps. So one of the things that really convinced me when I was still a skeptical engineer is how many people, when they came back, had verifiable observations of what happened in the ER or during their resuscitation. So what people commonly say is that when they die, when, they hear code blue or whatever in the hospital, they raise up out of their body, but they still have a body. It's like a spiritual body, but they're still themselves. In fact, they feel more alive, and not just with 5 senses, more like they say 50 senses we don't even have here. And because at first they are in the room of their resuscitation, when they come back, they can often report details that can be verified of who was in the room, what was said, what was done. One cardiologist I interviewed, Dr. Sabum, set out to disprove near-death experiences as just, something in the brain, hallucination, anoxy-oxygen deprivation, or chemicals flooding the brain. And after 5 years of research, he actually changed his mind and published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, saying these patients I interviewed, some of them could tell with such detail my resuscitation attempts, I could have used the tape to train other physicians. He said they saw and heard things they should not have been able to see when they had no brain waves. So that's one of the commonalities. The rest of them I'll tell you through another second thing that really convinced me. And in this new book, Imagine the God of Heaven, I put chapter 2 is science skeptics and NDEs. And I put the 10 points of evidence that convinced me, but have also convinced many skeptical medical doctors that these experiences are grounded in our reality. And they're real. They're not imaginative. They're not just in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And the second reason, first is verifiable observations. The second is when people blind from birth have a near-death experience, they can see.
That I was so drawn to Vicky's story because
That's the one I was going to tell you, because I think
please go with that. It was fascinating to me.
It illustrates so many of the commonalities. So Vicky was 22. She had been blind from birth. So someone blind from birth, you know, we think they have mental images like we do, visual mental pictures. They don't at all. And yet when she has this car accident and in the hospital, her heart stops, she's up above in the scene and she's trying to figure out what is this new sense. And then she realizes I must be dead, because she sees a young girl with very long hair down on the table below her. And she knew she had long hair. And then she sees the wedding ring, and her wedding ring had orange blossom on it. And she recognizes it and she realizes she's dead, but she feels wonderful. She's at peace. And she's like, hey, I know where I'm going. I'm out of here. And she was like, I'm going to see Jesus. That's what she thought to herself. And boom, she's out. And she starts traveling through what she called this tunnel. Now that's another commonality that they often, after they observe what's going on in the ER, they enter either a tunnel, but sometimes it's just they're out through our atmosphere and then beyond. And I like to give an analogy because it seems so bizarre, right? You know, so trippy, otherworldly. But think about it this way. We're living a three-dimensional experience, right? But what if death is just moving into a fourth or fifth dimension? So imagine we're living this experience on a flat black and white two-dimensional painting on the wall of your house, right? And you have up and down and side to side, but you don't even have the dimension in or out. So at death, when you die, your soul is peeled off that flat two-dimensional painting and suddenly brought out into this three-dimensional world of color that was always there. You just didn't even have that dimensional understanding. And now you can see what's going on in your two-dimensional world because it's contained within this bigger world. Mm-hmm. And then you're put back into that flat world and you have to describe three dimensions of color, but in two-dimensional black and white terms. And when I've interviewed near-death experiencers, they've said that's exactly it. It's these are experiences beyond our dimensional understanding. And so they travel and, you know, to a place many times. So Vicky comes, she described the colors, and the colors are something else that many NDEs say, these were colors beyond our color spectrum. Like the colors we don't even have, but also shades, like we call it red. Well, they said, like, imagine 1,000 shades of red, 1,000 shades of blue or aqua, and it's just so vivid. But she says, you know, she's experiencing color and she can only describe color as varying brightnesses. And then she says she enters this tunnel and there was no color. And many times they say it's dark, but there's light at the end. And she's going toward this light and she comes out into this beautiful place of grass and trees and flowers. It's like this gorgeous garden. Many people, this is another commonality. They see mountains, they see rivers. And then she sees this welcoming committee of people coming toward her, many that she realized and recognized had died before she had, like her grandmother, and two of her friends who died at age 7 and 9.
I was just going to say, but what's the commonality is, I feel there is so much fear around death. There's one individual that I can think of that is the only conversation I've had with someone that said, I said, "Are you afraid to die?" And he said, "No, I'm actually excited about it." And it really caught my attention. He said, "Because I know where I'm going." And transition, it's just transition, and he said, "Make sure that you keep talking to me because it's like I'm just in the next room." Now, will I be upset because there's so much I feel like I still have to do, but I'm not afraid of it. And that started opening my mind to just the thought of preparing and seeing it different. And I think you had said, there's somewhere in the book where you had talked about how we imagine heaven impacts our entire world and life here.
Well, of course, because if this life, well, we deny it, but this life is temporary. Like nobody keeps going here.
Right.
This life ends. It's guaranteed. And so if there's just nothing, well, that's going to affect how you live. But if this is just the first chapter of the rest of the book of life, and that from this life we step into more alive, more real, then what is this life? Is it preparation, and preparation for what? And what are the decisions we need to make? And then also all the things that bother us about this life, suffering, injustice, what you guys deal with, right? Forgiveness. Like, why forgive? I mean, you want justice, but justice sometimes is never done this side of eternity. But is it on the other side? Does that allow us to let go of the need to hold on to unforgiveness, which many times is a mistaken thought of there's got to be justice.
Right.
And even Vicky, so those are a few of the commonalities. She sees her grandmother coming toward her. And this commonality of a welcoming committee, that's something that people talk about all the time. And interestingly, Jesus talks about the same thing in Luke chapter 16. He says, use your worldly resources to make friends so that when it's gone, they will welcome you into an eternal home. And so all these things God's told us about in advance so that we can know and understand. She then sees her grandmother, and this is interesting because her grandmother was abusive. And so that was difficult for Vicky. But what she started to realize is that, and this is what people on the other side often see, is she saw, first of all, that God had forgiven her grandmother because her grandmother realized her need for forgiveness. But secondly, she saw her grandmother struggle with borderline personality disorder caused by trauma in her own past. Vicky didn't know any of that. But on the other side, we also experience not
total
only
awareness.
Yeah.
Total conscious. Oh, I think of awareness, understanding.
Well, and it comes, so another commonality, Vicky turns and because she sees a light brighter than the sun, but not hard to look at. And she sees this is Jesus. He knows who this is. It's Jesus. And she runs to him and he hugs her. And she said the hug went deeper than anything on earth. And interestingly, she talked about how this light, the brighter than the sun, comes out of him, but also that light, she said, was different than the light of earth. Now, this is also a commonality of near-death experiencers, but think about it. So Vicky said the light was love and life. It wasn't just light like on earth. And it came out of the grass and out of the trees and the birds and even the people, but most of all out of who she sees, and she knows this is Jesus. Well, what's fascinating is a blind person would have only heard that light shines on things, not light shines out of things. It doesn't on earth. But interestingly, the Jewish prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 60 and John, who was one of Jesus' followers who wrote the book of Revelation, and claim to be given a vision of heaven, says there's no sun or moon in heaven because the glory of God is its light, and the nations will walk in that light. And he also says God is love, you know, and Jesus said this too. He said, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so here you have a blind person, but I also have interviewed people from every religious background, every continent, and they're saying the same things. So in the presence of God, many times, and Vicky did as well, God gives them a life review. First of all, they feel a love from God that they can't even really describe. They've said things to me like, you know, imagine all the love you've ever felt from a grandmother, a parent, a spouse, the love you felt for your children or your grandchildren, all that love, put it into one, multiply it by 1,000 and just keep it going. And that's
Then, but I remember reading same love, but with no strings attached.
unconditional, completely unconditional. And so they're, and not just, you know, also they have the understanding that God uniquely knows them. Like they've never been known. So they didn't even know themselves as well as he does. And he's crazy about them in their uniqueness. And one gentleman, Dean Braxton, told me that as he was in the presence of God, he felt like he was the only one that God had ever created and that he had loved. And that love is growing. And then he thought that can't be so. And he thought about his wife. And then he saw, oh no, God feels like that about her. Like she's the only one, his only special child, you know, like unique. Right. And he feels that way about each one of us, which, you know, you think, okay, there are billions of people. But again, we're finite. And that's why we have such a hard time understanding this, that, you know, God's not bound by the limits that we are. And so these people tell us things that I think really help us get rooted in who we are and what we're here to do. And it frees us up. Because another thing I write about in Imagine the God of Heaven is the justice of God and the forgiveness of God. It frees us up to forgive when we realize that, you know, God's got it in control. And so Vicky, so this often comes to people though in this life review. So Vicky, Jesus says, do you want to see your life review? And she says, yes. And what this is, it's fascinating. Now, you got to understand on the other side, this is another commonality, time works differently. Near-death experiencers have told me there is no time on the other side, but others have said, no, there was time, but there was all the time you needed. Mm-hmm. And I talk about how two-dimensional time would give that feeling. You know, we only experience one-dimensional time. But in this, by the way, one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, in 2 Peter 3:8 says, to the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. I've had NDEs who didn't know that verse say almost the same thing. I don't know if it was seconds or if it was hours or days.
John, you know, when you say, can I interrupt you real quick? When you say
sure.
Dimensional, is that the same thing as saying humans see time linear? Meaning we right now at this moment, 5 minutes from now, tomorrow, next month, we can't see the our consciousness rather keeps us limited because we can only see from the contents of our consciousness. In other words,
we're locked in one-dimensional time moving in one direction.
But you're saying that the past, present, and future are happening all at the same time.
Well, here's how, and again, you know, I mean, I am locked in one-dimensional time. So who am I? I might be totally wrong.
You're studying these and you're getting these responses. I'm saying their responses, are they describing it as that past, present, future is all there?
Yes, many times they experience that. So when they're watching their life review, they describe it various ways, but the commonality is for most, they relive their whole life up till that point. And again, how can you do that if you are dead for 3 minutes or even an hour? You know, I have people who have hospital records, an hour and 45 minutes with no brain waves. And yet they're still here, they're back and saying all these things, you know.
Right.
It's amazing. But so imagine watching. So Vicky is there with Jesus and they're watching her life kind of like a 3-dimensional hologram, almost replaying the scenes of her life. But commonly they say the emphasis is on our relationships, not so much our accomplishments, but our relationships. And what God is showing them is that every little act of kindness, how it affected the other person, every little mean act, how it affected the other person, many times how it rippled, not from just that person to another 25, 35 times. So they come back saying 2 things. This is all across the globe. The life review has the biggest impact on them. And they say, God is love, unconditional love, and how we love or treat one another is what matters most to God. And it has the biggest impact. And so they see and they relive not only their own thoughts and feelings in these interactions, but they experience the thoughts and feelings of the other person. They experience what their actions did in
So they felt
the
those.
life together.
They felt. Is that what you're saying? They could feel that impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I would guess, I mean, especially I'm speaking for myself. You feel that impact, you want to go make a change.
Right.
Because you feel the impact versus just intellectually thinking about it. Because that was one of the things in the book that I think brought me so much comfort because, you know, you think of this life review and it causes anxious, stressful thoughts because you're looking at it from more of judgment.
Right.
And it was nothing about that. It was all out of love about not show me everything you've accomplished, but show me how you loved. And then it was an opportunity to like go back, even though most of them, it appeared through the book that no one wanted to come back. But some of them obviously had a choice, but it was more that you need to go back because you still have to teach and you have lessons to share about love and forgiveness.
You have a purpose. And that's exactly what Jesus said to Vicky. He said, you have a lot to teach people about love and about forgiveness.
And John, is there a theme? I know we were reading both, but of all these people that you've interviewed that have gone there and come back, what seems to be the theme? Is it just like your time hasn't come, you have more to do and teach, or is it a choice? But what do you see predominantly?
Well, yes. So overwhelmingly, they know the purpose of life in the end is love. That all the things that we're doing here, you know, where we get lost is trying to prove that we're valuable or worth something to the world when we're already worth something to God. And when we're not rooted in that love and the way God feels about us, because he created us. So we love our children, right? I mean, you know, God does even more. But when we don't know that and we get lost from that, then we go trying to prove ourselves, and then, you know, it creates all kinds of anxiety, hurts and hurt people. You've probably heard that. I've seen that a lot in my life as a pastor. But all of that, you know, comes back to, you know, God wants to heal those soul wounds and then teach us as we learn to walk in love with God, how to better love, forgive, serve, you know, do his will in our day-to-day relationships. And so, yeah, they come back, you know, commonly he says, you still have a purpose on earth, especially if he sends them back. If you know, they, this one friend of mine, Heidi, amazing story. But anyway, she was 16. And when God says you have to go back, you still have a purpose to accomplish. And she argues with him. And I love this because of how many near-death experiencers told me, yeah, they flat out, no, I'm not going, and argue with God.
I'm good, right?
And it's just a reminder that God gets us and we can be ourselves, and he understands.
That's really very comforting, I think. And I wanted to go to something you mentioned about the word you said, justice. Now, when we think justice, is this, darkness, light, darkness, heaven, hell? How do you translate all of that?
Yes. Okay. So, and especially I think in relation to what you guys focus on in forgiveness. So interestingly, there are hellish near-death experiences as well.
Mhm.
And I put a whole chapter in Imagine Heaven on the various types, but of people who have come forward reporting near-death experiences, 23% in one study reported hellish or distressing near-death experiences. So you have to take that into account as well. Now, the other side of that is that, like you said, Kelly, I think in the life review, people don't feel like God is condemning them or judging them. Instead, he's loving them because God is love. He can't not love. But what a lot of people misunderstand is they are judging themselves. So they realize the wrongs they did or the things they did that hurt other people, and so they're harshest on themselves. But what God is showing them, and I think this is what he wants us to understand, is that, the whole reason that God claimed to send Jesus was for forgiveness. It says there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And Jesus said, the famous verse, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. But right after it, it says, for God didn't send his son into the world to condemn the world or to judge the world, but that through him the world might be forgiven. So the whole basis of forgiveness is found in a God who is forgiven. He's forgiving of everything, the most heinous of things. And so the problem people have with this, and I think it relates to unforgiveness, because I was a pastor for 26 years, and I've dealt with a lot of people struggling with horrific things done to them, just horrible abuses. And those things are, first, you got to understand, those things are not God's will. Like, God doesn't say, oh, no big deal. But the other side of it is that when we are not able to forgive and to let go, it continues to harm us. As one person said, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping that it hurts your enemy.
Right.
It doesn't work. And so, as Jesus is being crucified, he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And the whole thing that the life review shows is that God does not stand ready to judge us or condemn us. Instead, he is open arms, ready to forgive and take into his eternal family anyone who wants it. Now, here's the catcher in the key. Because God is love, and he claims he created us in love and for love. And again, that's what every near-death experiencer who has a life review comes back saying. I mean, bar none, they all say it. But love is predicated on free will. In other words, I can't buy your love. I can give you gifts and hope that you'll fall in love with me, but you might just love the gifts and not me. I can't force love. You know, I can't put a gun to your head and say, love me, and, you know, make you love me. Because we all know that wouldn't really be love. Love cannot be bought, forced, or coerced. And that's even true of God's love. So God creates us for love, which means that he limits himself in giving us free will and allows us to go against his will and ways. And I believe that is the big lesson of this life. I think the reason this life is temporary is because what's to come, life eternal, is going to be so much better. But also, what is there for those who just decide, I don't want that? Like, if you truly don't want a Hitler, if a Hitler does not want the love or the light or the life of God, why in the world would they? Well, because I want to be God. You know, I want my will to be done. And we can get imprisoned in our own self-will. And if someone absolutely wants that, and many near-death experiencers have told me they've experienced the heartache and the mourning, the sadness of God showing them people who have rejected him and what hell is. And hell is the only place where God gives the creature what they want, if what they want is stay out of my life, God. So there's no light, there's no love, there's no life. It's just dominate or be dominated. It's like the worst prison scene you can imagine.
Okay, I want to ask you, and maybe you don't have an answer for me, and that's okay, but say there's someone listening and they heard you say that, you know, God does not cause these horrific events. And I understand that. But there's miracles that happen every single day. And they say to you, but he allowed this horrific thing in my life. What do you say to that?
Yes. And I'm so glad you asked that. Because I think that is, you know, I've talked to many atheists, and I've not found many atheists who really choose to say there is no God based on, they really did all their research, they really looked at all the evidence, and there's no God. The vast majority rejected God because they got hurt early on, and they didn't understand how in the world could God love me and allow that to happen, which I understand. I mean, I remember when my father died. I mean, I remember sitting there just saying, you know, well, if there is a God, screw you. I'm sorry, but that's exactly what I said.
It's real.
And I thought, you know, why would I want anything to do with you? Because I was in so much pain. You know, my dad was my best friend. I was in so much pain. And I had said my first prayers ever because I was coming to faith. So I had prayed, come on, God, you can do this. You can heal him. And he didn't. So I was hurt. What I realized as I thought it through is, if there really is no God, then all there is this hurt. If there really is no God, there's no restoration of all that's wrong. It will never be made right. And if you think about it, then why are we so bothered by it? If there's not this innate sense of things are wrong, but they can be made right. But in this life, many times they aren't made right. But what near-death experiencers have shown me as well, and I have a chapter in both Imagine Heaven and Imagine the God of Heaven on suffering, people who have suffered tremendously. And, you know, this Crystal, this one school teacher who, she was sexually abused from age 3. Her mom married abusive men who abused her and were violent. I mean, all kinds of horrific things. But when she had her near-death experience, she finds herself in the presence of God. And he shows her herself at age 3, pure and innocent, and how much he loved her. But he also shows her, and this is a commonality of people who have suffered. They see how somehow God works good even out of all the horrors and evils when we seek him and we follow him. When we seek him and we follow him in it, he can take anything and he can make something good out of it. It doesn't mean that thing was good. It doesn't mean that thing was his will. And the reason I say that is Jesus taught us to pray, Father, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And God's will is only done on earth through me if I'm willing, right? You if you're willing. That's the only way God's will is done. But Jesus wouldn't have taught us to pray that if God's will is always done. It's not always done. It was a fascinating verse. The religious leaders of Jesus' day crucified him, in the name of protecting God and God's image. Okay, so we can be led astray, we can be deceived, religion can go wrong, and Jesus' crucifixion is the perfect example. But interestingly, it says the Pharisees, the religious leaders who crucified Jesus, rejected God's purpose for them and hardened their hearts and crucified him. So that wasn't God's purpose for them. They really had a free will. So all of that to say, because still, I know that life review thing is hanging back there. Like, I don't want to do that because I don't want to see all the wrongs I've done. But the other side of it, and what people realize, is that God forgives. So anyone who wants forgiveness, they've got it.
Is that so, John? When you say that, anybody who wants it, is there some delineation of, because not to get into different theologies here, but there are certain denominations that teach this or that. You have to ask for it before you die. I mean, so where do you see in that situation, or I mean, how do you interpret that?
Well, I think God, knows the heart. So I don't think there's a formula. I think God knows the heart. And I think, he says, if you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. And I think why he did what he did through Jesus. And, in the new book, I show some of the other things that led me to believe that Jesus really was the Messiah foretold for thousands and thousands of years. That was really important for me, to understand how did these near-death experiences connect with Jesus and with the Bible. But I'm sorry, I totally derailed right there. Where was I going?
Yeah, I think you were just saying that he knows our heart, and so
yeah. So
the moment, in other words.
Yeah, right? I'll pick up there.
Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you 100%. And because in our film, in our story, real life story, Danny asked for forgiveness before he took his own life. But also in that same framework, the Joanna who was played by Leslie Uggams. There was a line in our film to start the movie and end the movie that said, she said, God does not see sin in different levels. That was a creation of man. And so that's why I'm just kind of wondering, when we talk about missing the mark or sin, how you see that, or based on obviously your studies.
Yeah. So I think the reason God can forgive anything is because it all has one root to God. To us, we have these categories, and then we rank. And interestingly, many times religious people rank the ones that what turns out in near-death experiences in the life review, didn't seem to be as big of a deal, but how we treated one another was a really big deal.
Really? That's
Oh
interesting.
yeah. And so there are very religious people who in God's presence, they're like, oh my gosh, I missed it. I'll tell you one that really got me was a pastor of a church, similar to what I had done, leading a church to help people, reach people, work with people who are skeptical or addicted or suffering or whatever. And, this great work, right? Well, he dies on the operating table and he's up above and he's there in the presence of God. And he felt the same, incredible love and acceptance. But also the Lord asks him a question. He said, what are the names of your friends, of your children's best friends? And Steve said, I was stuck. He said they had been over to my house a lot. I was always friendly to them, but I had never even taken the time to get to know their names. I was too busy doing important things. And man, that was like, whoa.
I remember reading that. I'm so glad you brought that to the attention of the listeners, because it goes back to the relationship.
It does.
It's all about our relationship.
And I think,
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Well, so what I was going to say is that, we rank all these different sins, but really at the core, there's only one. And that is putting my will be done even before God's. And we all do that. We've all done that. I mean, if you don't think you have you ever said, I'll never, but you did? So you've broken your own moral code. How much more God's? We all have. And so what God, I think, wants to know is, do you recognize that what's missing in this world is God and the love of God? And if we want his guidance, if we want that, he forgives us of all those other things, because now we are right related to the one who created us. We're right related to the maker. We're not trying to be the creator and be, my will be done on earth in your life and God, you too, or I'm gonna, go my own way. And so I think that is
key. What you just shared is like, I think it's easy to get caught up in paying attention and placing judgment in other people's actions and lives. And, I think the attention we need to give is what you just said. Are we allowing God's will in our own life? And what does that look like?
Because that's all I can control.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is, it's such a freeing thing though, when you really get it. Like, we can all accomplish the purpose that we are here for. We can. It's not that difficult. Now, do I know it fully? No. And it's been a wild, windy road at times. And there are a lot of things that I've still gone, seriously, God, what? Why are you doing this? I don't get it. And I'm upset about it. But at the end of the day, what it requires is just being still and quiet and staying connected to that quiet voice in your soul, in your mind, and being willing, staying open and willing to the love of God and to letting him follow you to do the next right thing. And if you do that simple thing, you'll get it. There was a CEO that I interviewed who died of, he had a pulmonary embolism, block his heart, block his lungs, and then, shut down his heart. And he is there in heaven, and he's with Jesus. He's walking with Jesus. And Jesus says to him, a lot of stuff happened. This is in the new book, and Imagine the God of Heaven. A lot of stuff happened, but Jesus says to him, you have to go back, beloved. Your purpose is not accomplished yet. And he argues. He's like, I don't want to go back. I know my kids and my wife are going to be okay. This is wonderful. This is the best thing ever. Don't send me back. And he says, you need to go back. And he says, you have a purpose. And he said, well, then tell me my purpose. And now he's a CEO. So he has a 5-year, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan, type A, he's got it all planned out. He said, well, tell me my purpose, and so at least I'll know it. And Jesus says to him, no, I won't tell you your purpose because you'll be tempted to get out ahead of me. And I want you to walk with me. And as you're quiet and still before me, you'll know the next thing. And a butterfly lands on his shoulder. And this is in heaven. And a butterfly lands on his shoulder. And he says, what is that, Lord? Because he said everything happens for a purpose. He knew that for a reason. It's intentional. And Jesus says, that's wisdom. And what Randy realized is that he was giving him kind of a parable that, and he said, as you walk with wisdom, you will fulfill your purpose. And what he realized is you don't run with a butterfly on your shoulder. You've got to carefully and gently walk to keep the butterfly on your shoulder. But it was like this parable of, look, my spirit will be with you. Stay centered, moment by moment. Your purpose will be revealed as you just stay open and willing before me.
I think it just confirms that as I'm listening to that story about you don't run with the butterfly, everything they had shared was there is no rush, there is no hurry. There's no rush and no hurry.
And if we can here, I wanted to go to your chapter in Imagine Heaven. And if you don't have that book, everybody make sure you get this book, Imagine Heaven. In chapter 15.
And the Imagine God of Heaven, correct?
Yes, and that in its latest version. Yeah. But in the chapter on angels, John, I want to set this up. You say God has created spiritual creatures who do not live confined to time and space as we do. One species we call angels. Angel literally means messenger, and we had a similar character again in our film, Joanna. But you kind of go into a little bit about this, that scriptures teach that angels or messengers are spiritual creatures who live in God's realm, but they interact with earth in order to serve people and accomplish God's will. Then you reference Jeffrey Burton Russell, who points out that although modern people have tended to believe less and less in a supernatural evil force, the practical experience of evil has not decreased, but maybe even increased in our society. I think that's probably not hard to agree with if you look at certainly the last, several decades.
Yeah.
But can you comment on that? And then I want you to also comment on the next page. You have that because you kind of go into the devil, evil spirits, whatever we call it. They have no power over us except the power we give to them. You kind of alluded to that already, but can you talk a little bit about the angel part and what you have come to understand from your studies?
Yeah, and the guy Jeffrey Burton Russell is the world's leading historian of evil. So he is UC Santa Barbara professor who studied evil throughout history.
Well, that just kind of sent a shiver down my spine. I read that in your book, and I just thought, wow, I don't know, that's such a interesting. I'm really fascinated with what you've come to learn from this.
Yeah, well, and so near-death experiencers do experience angelic creatures and demonic creatures. And angelic creatures, many times people say, oh, well, he or she died and got her wings and, now she's an angel. Well, I don't think that's true. I think angels are another species of created creature. So if you think about it, God who created is ridiculously creative. There are 2 million species on planet Earth that we have named, but they are discovering so many new ones every year. They think there are probably about 7 million different species, variety. And angels, I believe, are creatures created by God, but they don't live in our dimensional realm. They live in dimensional realms beyond ours. Like we were talking about, that I think near-death experiencers are experiencing. There are angels who also, the angels apparently had a free will as well. And there are those who have also rejected God's will, God's reign and rule, and God gave them what they wanted. And again, it's interesting because it even says in the Bible that hell was not created for people. It was created for the eternal angels. That there's only one place where God agreed to say, okay, you don't want me, I will stay out. And that's what hell is. So yes, there are angelic creatures. There are demonic or evil spiritual beings. And I think, and again, I go into this in Imagine Heaven. This is just my philosophical musings, but I think there's some reasons to think that makes sense. That part of why we are here on earth and part of why God remains removed, not completely, but we all know, like, where is he? I don't hear an audible voice. I don't see anything. Is because angels rejected God in eternity. So their decision was eternal. God created us in a temporal world and in the knowledge of both good and evil, meaning we experience a taste of both, but it's not eternal, it's temporary. And there is the ability to forgive. So there's the ability to fall and do wrong and yet be forgiven and restored. And by the way, that's why forgiveness is so important to God, because it's the central learning of what we're doing. And if God is so forgiving, how can we want to be forgiven or need to be forgiven and yet not forgive one another? And Jesus gave a lot of stories about that. And so he wants us to forgive as he also forgives us. And so I think angels are looking in. We do have guardian angels. We have scribe angels who are recording our lives according to near-death experiencers. And I think they are learning something without having to go through it. So in other words, the angels are still innocent. And yet how will they learn what it's like to be separated from God so that they will never choose separation from God? Well, that's what we're going through, and they're watching. Now that's just that's my philosophical, theological musings. I could be wrong, but I think both near-death experiences and what the Bible teaches make sense of that.
I wanted to thank you for sharing that. There was a quote from 2 Chronicles that the eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. Obviously, you have a heart that is committed to him. I'm curious as to if you are looking in throughout your life, how do you see that he has strengthened you?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's been a lifelong journey. But I think what I've seen, and I talk about this in Imagine the God of Heaven, that we really can hear God's voice, but I've never heard an audible voice. I never have. But near-death experiencers say another commonality. He doesn't talk audibly. He talks directly to their soul. And I've used the analogy that, right now I'm trying to get all the thoughts in my mind into your mind, but I can't speak fast enough. I have to use this microphone and, the airwaves, and then your ears, and, you're probably thinking other things. So probably about a quarter of what is in my head trying to get across actually gets into your mind. So audible communication is not very efficient. What would be much more efficient if I could just put all my thoughts directly in your mind. And you could still go, I don't want to think that. I'm hungry. I want to think about lunch. Or, you could completely push my thoughts out, but you would have my thoughts. And that would be a more direct form of communication. And I believe that is how God communicates with each one of us if we have ears to hear. And Jesus said this many times, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying. So we all have these, right? But he's talking about a spiritual kind of learning to listen and hear. And I talk about, how I learned that by acting in faith on those promptings that seemed in line with the love and kindness of God, when he's prompting me to do something and I do it and I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I'll give you one very simple example, but it was the first one that got my attention. I'm praying. This is right after I started following God, and I'm praying, but I'm praying about something totally different. And the thought comes into my mind, call Allison. Allison was my sister. She was in school at the time. So I thought, I'm not going to call Allison. Kept praying again, call Allison. I'm not going to call Allison. She's not home. She's at school. Call Allison. Third time I said, okay, why do I keep thinking this? And I'm like, I'm praying. So I'm like, God, do you want me to call Allison? Nothing. No clarity at all, which I find is usual. But I just decide, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to call. So I call and she picks up the phone. She had skipped school. She was depressed. And I was able to encourage her. And I was like, okay, that was bizarre. But I've seen over the course of my life, the more I act on those promptings that are in line with what Jesus taught God is like, and I act on them, I look back like that and I'm like, oh, okay, sure. I did hear your voice.
Right.
Though it's never, I'm never sure, honestly.
Right. It's kind of like, we think of it as a muscle that you have to build, right?
Yeah.
You have to exercise that. And the more you do that, it seems like the understanding becomes clearer on when that is the message from God or just us thinking an idea up, which I used to be really good at.
Yeah.
By the way, and then thinking that was right.
Tacos and hot salsa.
Yeah, talk myself into it. But John, this has been so amazing. I mean, okay, I feel like we could talk for hours.
Well, I could, but I know we want to respect your time. But before we close, so you just said that, Bob and I and probably our listeners are going to get a quarter of what you just said. So in that quarter, what is the most important thing that you want to make sure that we actually heard?
Well, I would say, and this is what my life mission is, and it's why I wrote Imagine the God of Heaven, is that you cannot even conceive, try as hard as you might, how wonderful your Creator is, and how much He cares about you, and how willing He is to forgive all our wrongs, and just in a very kind, gentle way, walk with us and teach us as we live our lives. You can't imagine how wonderful that is and how wonderful He is. And so many times we think God is putting these burdens on us, guilt and shame and burdens. And one of my favorite verses is Jesus saying in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, you who are burdened and weary, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke," or, it's what an ox used to plow a field. "Put that on you and learn from me, because I'm gentle and humble of heart, and you'll find rest for your souls."
Thank you.
God is not one who wants us stressed out, feeling condemned, full of shame, guilty all the time, just the opposite. And so that's my life message is, seek him and you'll find him.
Mm. Yeah, that was strong in the book. There was a sentence that said, there is no room for secrets, shame, just love. Like there was no negativity. And I just thought, wow, that's just beautiful just to think about it. But as we close, I mean, it's interesting if I look back at some of my thoughts about heaven, I was just like, not that it's boring, but it's like, what are you going to do forever? And after reading your book, it just gave me a new insight to really start imagining it, but also start preparing for it. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
Yeah, and I love the word imagine, because it is a higher faculty that God has given us humans, the ability to, create and visualize things on the screen of our mind. And it's such a great metaphor for thinking of heaven, that if we can understand what it really is, and you've done such a great job here, John, and just your research and how you put this book together. But I also want to thank you just for your heart and your sincerity and your wonderful message, and just sharing all of that with our guests on Time for Forgiveness today.
Well, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. So, John, that was a wrap, but that was
went
amazing.
Way longer than what we usually do. So I hope that we're respectful of your time. But I could talk to you for like go to a place for a weekend. And oh my gosh, I'm kind of blown away by your work.
I always feel this one thing came through me, John, all through this, is just the word was hope. And that's a great message that you share with your stories here, and just how you deliver your message.
Well, and I'm just the messenger. So I'm not creating the hope, but that is I think that's the truth.
Right. Yeah. We say we deal in hope, but we're just trying to share what we know through these messages. And
well, I'm about to go tonight and watch your movie. I didn't I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I was going to say, I would love to talk to you again after you watch it, because there is such special meaning with the butterfly.
Right.
Oh, really?
So I'm going to have to go back and just really listen to the podcast about what you shared about the butterfly, because it was very moving to me.
And John, one last thing before we go here, we just set a date of May 31st, 2025 for the first annual World Forgiveness Summit. And I'd love for you to consider being there with us as one of our guest speakers. So May 31st, 2025. I just want to plant that seed.
Okay. Will you send an email with a reminder of that, and we'll
Sure. Yeah.
My only warning is May 31st is my anniversary. So I'll have
actual day?
The actual day.
Wow. How many years, may I ask?
36.
Okay, because we're getting ready to celebrate our 30th.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations back.
Okay. Well, we'll
That's
still
awesome.
send it, but I totally understand.
Well, and we'll I mean, my wife makes most of these decisions anyway of where I
Have you
go.
ever visited this beautiful place called Kansas City?
Oh yeah.
It could be a lovely 36th wedding anniversary getaway.
There you go.
Well, you never know.
That's where we're at. But okay. Well, John, thanks again.
Okay.
Staying in touch.
Great to meet you guys.
Thank
See
you
you.
so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I need to do anything, or is it all uploaded? I know.
Well, we're all set. We'll get you everything in advance, and we'll give you, we'll let you know when we're going to go live. We post every Thursday, but your episode will probably come out sometime in September. Is
okay.
What the queue looks like. And obviously, we'd love if you'd lock arms with us on this, John, and share it on your socials as well.
Oh, absolutely.
We're really inspired to continue to build this, and our vision is to take this thing we call forgiveness all over the world and do it by holding these summits
Awesome.
in large cities.
And I was fascinated just reading a little bit about you guys. You did financial investments for 403 401ks?
Yeah, I'm part of a firm that is a money management firm, and that was the division, still the division I'm involved at today. Creative planning is the name.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what was the impetus of this? Was real life story that the movies and book are based on?
Right. So it chronicles a period piece in our life about 14 years ago. So we've been on this for over a decade. But when you said God does not speak in audible, that's exactly what happened to me. It came to me as a no. I didn't even know how to describe it at the time because it wasn't words. It was do this thing that we've been on for 14 years. So that started the journey of writing, taking the seeds of what we had come through, this devastation, and trying to turn it into a story that could help people. So that was the whole motivation.
And was it your friends that this happened to?
It was my best friend since middle school, and her husband had murdered her and one of their boys. And I think, obviously, that's a whole nother conversation around forgiveness in regards to grief and how could I have not seen the signs? So I was experiencing it very differently. And Bob was just like, I just have to figure out how he got there. And then this knowing came through that we're supposed to do this film. And it took a minute for both of us because I don't know, I was afraid to tell the story. It's like, why would you want to tell a story about that? You think people are going to judge it, just like I really embraced these people that come back. And it's like, at first, maybe they're not going to want to share, but then they feel called to share. So from there, the movie, and then here comes the podcast and some other opportunities that we've been working on in regards to bringing a message around hope and forgiveness.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so important. I mean, it really is. And you're doing a great work. It's really cool to hear.
Well, thank you.
You're doing incredible work, and I'm just learning and growing from your book. And it's really causing me to get curious with myself and my relationship. So I appreciate you writing this.
Well, you're very welcome. And thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, John.
We did.
All right. Stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Wow. So that was amazing. There was so much there. That was like drinking from a fire hose. I was just, my head was spinning trying to take all that in. Kelly, what was one of your takeaways?
I think this is a book, obviously, that everyone should buy and read. And it's something that I think it's not a once through, because there's a lot here that has got me thinking. But one of the stories, there was a young man, and when God had said he was going back, he had said, you must see in a new light. And I believe that light is a different perspective. And the perspective I'm coming from after, talking with John is just that everything goes back to the relationship and to the concept of love. And if we stay on that idea, it's probably a lot easier for me to move in the direction of forgiveness.
Yeah, that makes total sense from the way that he put it. Another way that he explains something is the difference between, darkness and light, evil and good, and that in the darkness, the most powerful lie is to persuade us to play God in our little universe. And that's how we get going down the wrong path, is that we're not letting God be God in our life.
Well, one of the things I wanted, but obviously we went longer than we expected, and I could keep going and talking with them for a while, but it showed in the book in 1982, a Gallup poll reported there was 8 million people from the New York Times that had accounted for near-death experiences. 8 million. And that was back in 1982.
8 million.
So consider how many more. And I don't know. I think it hits me that there is such a purpose to those obviously those are happening for a reason, and God wants people to come back in the sense that they can encourage and teach and learn.
Right. And I also liked his, I thought it was interesting when you asked him about when a tragedy occurs and people disconnect from God because of that. But his response that God doesn't, create those tragedies. It's really our choice, though, how we're going to move through it and how we're going to choose to respond and the meaning we attach going forward. So, yeah.
He had also said, and see, I could just keep going because there's like so much to this book that we didn't even get into, but how he was talking about imagination, that it was a gift from God. I love that it's Imagine Heaven, the name of his book, but how many of us use our imagination against us for things that we don't want. Maybe just to become mindful of using that powerful gift for us, moving you in the direction of everything that you want, and starting to help you prepare for heaven.
Yeah, great. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, honey. Using our imagination for the right things instead of the wrong things. All right. I think that's a good way to end. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us again on Time for Forgiveness. And if you're enjoying amazing guests like John Burke, the author of Imagine Heaven, please share what we're doing on your socials and with your friends and your family. We're really inspired to grow this in a big way. So any help you can give us to get this message out around Time for Forgiveness, please do that. And we'll, on behalf of Kelly and myself and Sean Parr, we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Time for Forgiveness.
Thank you so much for listening and for watching Time for Forgiveness. Hey, listen, visit our website at timeforforgiveness.org. And here's the great news. You can now download our workbook. Just click on the QR code. It's that simple. You can also message us on our website because we read every single message, and we certainly love to help. You can also reach us on our socials on Instagram and Facebook, and you can email us, again, at info@timeforforgiveness.org. I'm Sean Parr for Bob and Kelly Pascuzzi. We'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness.